The family had lived on that land long before anyone called it a community. The house was not fancy, but it was solid, built with care and repaired by hand over the years. The land around it had space to breathe. Trees stood where they always had, and the driveway was wide enough for visitors and work trucks. For decades, no one questioned how the family lived. They paid their taxes, helped neighbors, and stayed out of trouble. It was quiet, simple, and honest. Everything began to change when new houses appeared nearby. One by one, empty fields turned into neat rows of identical homes. Signs went up, promising luxury living, strict standards, and a homeowners association that would keep everything perfect. At first, the family did not think much of it. They were not part of the new development and had never agreed to any association rules. They assumed life would continue as it always had. Soon, unfamiliar cars began driving slowly past their property. People stopped to stare, sometimes taking photos on their phones. The family felt watched in a way they never had before. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived in the mailbox. It was polite on the surface but firm in tone. It said the property was now considered within the influence area of the association and listed several concerns. The fence was described as outdated. The driveway was labeled non-compliant. Even the placement of trash bins was mentioned. The family read the letter twice, confused. They had never signed anything. They had never attended a meeting. Still, the letter warned that continued violations could lead to fines. The family decided not to panic. They believed it was a mistake that could be cleared up with a calm conversation. A week later, another letter came. This one was less polite. It included photos taken from the road and added new complaints. A vehicle was parked overnight in view of the street. A shed behind the house did not match the approved appearance. The letter ended by saying enforcement would continue until compliance was achieved. The family began to feel uneasy. They reached out by email, explaining that their property was private and not part of the association. Days passed with no reply. Instead, a notice was taped to the fence facing the road. Neighbors from the new development slowed their cars to read it. Some shook their heads. Others whispered at the next association meeting held in a large hall nearby. The family decided to attend. They wanted answers. When they arrived, conversation stopped. People looked at them with curiosity and distance. During the meeting, a board member spoke about maintaining order and property values. Without naming anyone, the comments were clearly directed at the family. When it was their turn to speak, the family calmly explained their history on the land and their belief that the association had no authority over them. The response was cold. The board member said rules existed for a reason and that resistance would only make matters worse. The meeting moved on quickly, leaving the family standing there, unheard. After that night, the pressure increased. Inspectors began showing up without notice. Sometimes they stood near the road, writing things down. Other times, they knocked on the door asking questions that felt more like accusations. The family remained polite but firm. They asked for legal proof of authority. None was provided. The stress began to affect daily life. Simple routines felt heavy. Every car that slowed outside made hearts race. Friends visited less often, worried they might cause trouble. Even longtime neighbors avoided conversation, afraid of being pulled into conflict. One evening, as the family sat down for dinner, flashing lights filled the windows. Police vehicles stopped in front of the house. Officers stepped out, hands resting near their belts. The family froze, confused and frightened. An officer knocked and explained they had received a call reporting a disturbance and possible threat. The family was stunned. There was no noise, no argument, no danger. The officers quickly saw that. They spoke with the family, looked around briefly, and apologized for the disruption. Before leaving, one officer quietly said this was not the first time they had been called out like this for neighborhood disputes. After the police left, the house felt different. What had once been a place of comfort now felt exposed. The family realized the situation had crossed a line. This was no longer about fences or driveways. Someone had used emergency services as a weapon. That night, the family talked for hours. Fear mixed with anger, but beneath it was resolve. They decided they would no longer ignore the behavior or hope it would stop on its own. They began saving every letter, every email, every photo. Cameras were checked. Dates and times were written down. If this was going to continue, they would be ready. Outside, the community looked calm. Lawns were trimmed, lights glowed softly, and everything appeared perfect. But inside the family's home, something had changed. They now understood they were not just dealing with rules. They were facing power used without care, and this was only the beginning. The days that followed the police visit were tense. Every knock on the door, every car slowing down on the street, made the family's hearts race. They felt under constant watch. It was no longer enough to simply live quietly. They had to be alert at all times. Even simple tasks like taking out the trash or checking the mail felt like a performance under scrutiny. Neighbors once waved hello, avoided eye contact. Some whispered in passing, their words half caught on the wind. The family understood the fear it was contagious. People were wary of getting involved, afraid they might become the next target. The house that had been a home was now a stage. The family was center stage without ever asking for it. The HOA's tactics grew more aggressive. Notices arrived almost daily. Each one carried a stern tone, new complaints, and threats of fines. Some were handwritten, some printed, and each one seemed designed to make the family feel small and powerless. The family read them carefully, noting every detail. Knowing these papers would be important later, one morning, the father of the household stepped outside to find a group of HOA representatives standing at the edge of the property. They claimed they were there for a routine inspection. The father politely explained that the property was private and that they were not authorized to enter. The representatives pushed harder, arguing rules and regulations. Their voices were calm but firm, as if they expected submission. The father held his ground, but inside, his anxiety grew. The mother watched from the porch, clutching a cup of tea, her mind racing. She knew the family could not continue like this. Something had to change. That night, after the children were in bed, the parents sat at the kitchen table, going over every letter, every notice, every interaction. They realized this was more than harassment. It was systematic, deliberate, and designed to break their resolve. The next day, the father called the local police department to ask about the last visit. He wanted to understand what legal options were available if these incidents continued. The officer he spoke with was patient, listening carefully. He explained that repeated false calls to 911 could be considered harassment, that there were ways to document and protect the family. That conversation gave the parents a small but important sense of relief. They were not powerless. Feeling more prepared, the family began documenting everything. Cameras were set up discreetly around the property. Every visit, every letter, every strange car was recorded. They took notes, sometimes in the middle of the night, and kept them organized. They began keeping a detailed timeline, understanding that their evidence would need to be precise. Every photo, every video, every email could become a crucial part of a larger picture. As the family built their records, they noticed patterns. Every letter came after some minor, almost insignificant action. A lawnmower left outside too long. A guest car parked briefly. A fence board replaced. The HOA seemed to monitor every movement. The family realized this was not about safety or community standards. It was about control, fear, and intimidation. Friends who once dropped by for coffee now called ahead nervously. The children, who had once played freely in the yard, became cautious, glancing at every passerby. The family tried to protect them from worry, but the tension was impossible to hide completely. The youngest sometimes asked why people stared or whispered, and the parents struggled to answer in a way that did not scare them further. Then came the unexpected support. A neighbor who had lived in the community for years approached the family quietly one afternoon. He handed over a small packet of papers, saying they had belonged to the HOA board for some time. The papers revealed internal discussions, complaints about the family, and suggestions for enforcement tactics. The documents showed that the intimidation was planned and deliberate. The neighbor warned them to be careful, that the board could retaliate if they knew he had spoken. The family thanked him, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow someone had finally helped. But it was risky for both sides. Armed with the documents, the family felt more confident. They began drafting letters of their own, responding carefully to every accusation. They maintained a polite tone, explaining their legal position and emphasizing their right to privacy. They included evidence, pictures, and references to past communications. Their goal was to remain calm, factual, and strong, without giving the HOA any excuse to escalate further. The stress of constant observation did not lessen, but the family found small ways to reclaim normalcy. They planted a small garden, repaired the old fence carefully, and spent quiet evenings together. Each evening felt like a victory, a reminder that their home was still theirs, no matter the threats. They focused on what they could control, refusing to let fear dominate every moment. As weeks turned into months, the HOA intensified their tactics. Notices included threats of fines that would accumulate daily, increasing pressure. Inspectors continued to appear at odd hours. Yet, the family remained diligent, documenting every interaction and preparing for the inevitable legal battle. The process was exhausting, but it strengthened their determination. They knew that one mistake could be used against them, so they exercised patience, discipline, and care in every decision. One afternoon, a new challenge arrived. The family found a notice posted on their front door claiming that police reports would be filed if they did not comply with specific rules immediately. The notice was dramatic, meant to provoke fear. The family read it together, silently taking note of every word. They knew this was another attempt to intimidate, but now they were ready. Instead of reacting in panic, they photographed the notice, scanned it, and filed it with all other documentation. The family also began reaching out to legal advisors, asking for guidance. They were careful to select experts familiar with HOA disputes, private property rights, and harassment law. The advice they received helped them understand the limits of the HOA's authority, their legal protections, and the proper steps for formal complaints. With this knowledge, the family felt less like victims and more like participants in a fight for justice. Despite the constant stress, the family learned small victories mattered. When inspectors arrived unannounced and left without evidence of violation, they celebrated silently. When letters arrived that ignored their legal arguments, they filed them carefully and prepared to escalate if necessary. Each small act of preparation strengthened their confidence and made them realize they could withstand the pressure. By the end of Part 2, the family had transformed. What began as a peaceful, quiet life had become a test of resilience, patience, and courage. They were no longer passive residents. They had become vigilant, prepared, and determined. The HOA's attempts to intimidate had failed to break their spirit. Instead, the family had grown closer, wiser, and more resolute, ready for the next challenge. Knowing that standing up for their rights would be a long and difficult journey, the day the case went to court was one the family would never forget. They woke early, the house unusually quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. The family dressed carefully, each garment chosen with care. They wanted to look composed, respectful, and ready. Even the children, though nervous, understood this was important. Their parents reassured them quietly, saying that the truth had to be heard and that they had worked hard to prepare. Inside the courthouse, the atmosphere was tense but controlled. The family sat together, reviewing their notes one last time. Every piece of evidence they had gathered over months, letters, emails, photos, police reports, and documents from the HOA was organized and ready. They had memorized timelines, incidents, and details, knowing that clarity and accuracy would matter most. The parents held hands briefly, silent promise to face the day together. As the courtroom filled with people, the HOA representatives entered. Their expressions were polite but strained, aware that the scrutiny was now public and formal. They brought legal counsel and tried to maintain an air of authority. But the family could see the subtle tension in their posture, the slight hesitations. The power they had wielded over months in informal ways was no longer absolute. The judge arrived, and the proceedings began. The family's lawyer spoke first, presenting the evidence in a calm, methodical manner. Letters and emails were read aloud. Photos were shown on a large screen. Police reports were referenced, each one reinforcing the pattern of intimidation and harassment. Every false 911 call, every unexpected visit, every threatening notice was laid out clearly. The family watched as the evidence told a story that had long been theirs to bear, but was now shared with others, who could understand and validate it. When the HOA Board's counsel spoke, they tried to minimize the actions, framing them as routine enforcement and concern for community standards. They argued that the family had been uncooperative and that all actions taken were within their authority. But the evidence told a different story. The judge listened carefully, asking questions that revealed the inconsistency between claims and documented facts. It became clear that intimidation and misuse of authority had been central to the HOA's behavior. Witnesses were called. Police officers who had responded to the false emergency calls testified, describing the unnecessary strain on resources and the clear exaggeration in each call. Neighbors spoke cautiously but honestly, confirming that the family had been respectful and cooperative despite the constant pressure. Even the former HOA member who had shared internal documents provided testimony that highlighted the premeditated nature of the intimidation. The courtroom audience listened quietly, drawn into the story of ordinary people standing against authority misused. The family's strength, patience, and thorough documentation impressed many. People whispered among themselves, some nodding, others shaking their heads in disbelief at the extent of what had occurred. The media present took careful notes, aware that this story would resonate far beyond the courtroom walls. Throughout the proceedings, the family remained composed. They felt a mixture of relief, anxiety, and cautious hope. Months of preparation, sleepless nights, and careful documentation had led to this moment. Every glance from the judge, every acknowledgement of evidence felt like a small victory. They were no longer invisible. Their experience had a voice, and that voice was being heard. Cross-examination brought tense moments. The HOA representatives tried to challenge specific documents, questioned the validity of photos, and questioned the motivations of witnesses. The family's lawyer responded firmly but respectfully, reinforcing the credibility of every piece of evidence. The judge intervened when necessary, maintaining order and focus on facts. By the end of the day, the patterns were undeniable. The courtroom adjourned for a brief recess. The family stepped outside, breathing in the fresh air. Realizing the magnitude of what they had accomplished simply by standing up and documenting the truth, they spoke quietly, expressing cautious optimism while acknowledging the challenges ahead. The children were quiet, sensing the seriousness, but also feeling a sense of hope that had been missing for months. When the trial resumed, the family observed as the judge asked final questions and reviewed the presented evidence. Legal arguments concluded, and both sides summarized their positions. The HOA emphasized community standards and responsibility, while the family's side highlighted rights, harassment, and documented misconduct. The contrast was stark, a story of ordinary people versus an organization that had misused power. The judge took a moment, then issued the ruling. The language was careful and precise. The judgment clearly cited repeated misuse of authority, intimidation tactics, and false emergency calls. The HOA was held responsible for damages resulting from their actions, including legal fees and penalties for harassment. The family had not only defended their home, but had forced accountability on an organization that had tried to act above the law. The reaction in the courtroom was quiet but profound. The family felt a rush of relief, tears forming quietly. They had endured months of stress, sleepless nights, and constant scrutiny. Now, their patience and preparation had resulted in recognition of the truth. The HOA representatives looked stunned, their confidence shattered. They had expected compliance and fear, but instead, they faced judgment and consequences. After leaving the courtroom, the family returned home, the house feeling different. The sunlight seemed warmer, the air lighter. They knew the fight was not over, completely restructuring compliance. And community adjustments would take time, but a significant burden had been lifted. They had stood up for themselves without aggression, relying on evidence, persistence, and the law. Over the following weeks, news outlets picked up the story. Local papers and online platforms reported the ruling, describing the HOA's misconduct and the family's resilience. Messages of support arrived from neighbors, friends, and even strangers who had faced similar issues. The family realized that their experience had inspired others to question unfair practices and to document their rights carefully. The children returned to playing in the yard more freely. Their laughter filled the space that had once felt tense and heavy. Small celebrations like planting flowers or repairing a section of the fence felt meaningful. Every ordinary task became a symbol of regained control and peace. The parents found themselves able to focus again on work, hobbies, and time together without the constant anxiety that had dominated their lives. In the community, discussions about HOA authority began to change. Board members and neighbors spoke cautiously, but more openly about rules, boundaries, and accountability. Policies were reviewed and procedures were clarified to prevent future abuse. The family's courage had not only protected their home, but had influenced change that would benefit others. By the end of Part 4, the family had emerged from the courtroom not only victorious but transformed. They had faced a powerful organization, endured months of harassment, and relied on patience, evidence, and legal guidance to achieve justice. Their experience was a lesson in resilience, in standing up for one's rights, and in the power of careful preparation. What had begun as a threat to their home and peace had become a story of triumph, courage, and accountability, reminding them and others that even ordinary people can confront abuse and prevail. The months after the court ruling were filled with a mix of relief, reflection, and rebuilding. The family had finally received justice, but the journey had left deep marks. They understood that regaining normal life would take time, patience, and care. Yet, for the first time in over a year, they felt the tension that had haunted every day begin to lift. The first task was restoring the sense of home. The yard, once a place of caution, became a playground again. The children ran freely, their laughter echoing against the walls that had held so much stress. Small projects around the house, a freshly painted fence, new flowers planted near the porch, a repaired swing felt like symbols of freedom regained. The family celebrated quietly, savoring each ordinary task as a victory. The community, too, had shifted. News of the ruling spread, and conversations changed. Neighbors no longer whispered with fear but discussed policies, boundaries, and accountability. The HOA was forced to restructure. Board members resigned, and new leadership took over. Procedures were clarified, and rules that had been misused were rewritten to prevent future abuse. The family had not only protected their home but had influenced a community-wide change, creating a safer environment for everyone. Financially, the ruling was significant. The court awarded damages totaling $4 million, covering legal fees, fines, and compensation for the harassment endured. While the family had not sought wealth, the money provided security and a tangible recognition of the wrongs they had faced. It allowed them to invest in the property, improve their home, and even create a small savings fund for the children's future. More importantly, it reinforced a vital lesson: standing up for one's rights can have real, meaningful consequences. The family also began engaging with local media and community organizations to share their story. They hoped that by speaking openly, they could encourage others to document harassment, understand their rights, and resist intimidation. Each interview, each article, became a tool for education and prevention. Strangers reached out, sharing their own experiences and expressing gratitude. The family's private struggle had grown into a public lesson on resilience and justice. Despite the victories, the emotional impact remained. The family took time to heal. They attended counseling sessions to manage stress and anxiety that had built up over months of harassment. Quiet evenings together, long walks in the yard, and shared meals became part of the healing process. They talked openly about their feelings, acknowledging fear, frustration, and anger, but also pride, relief, and hope. Slowly, they rebuilt a sense of emotional security alongside the physical and legal victories. Trust, once shaken, was restored carefully. The children learned to feel safe again in their surroundings. While the parents learned to navigate community interactions without fear, they reconnected with friends who had supported them quietly. Reinforcing bonds that had been strained under the pressure of intimidation, the family understood that relationships like property and rights needed care and attention to recover fully. One significant change was the family's approach to future conflicts. They had learned the power of documentation, preparation, and calm persistence. They knew that quick reactions, anger, or fear could be exploited, and that careful observation, record keeping, and legal consultation were the strongest tools against misuse of authority. This knowledge became a lasting part of their daily life, source of confidence and resilience. As the months passed, the home regained its warmth and energy. The garden flourished. The children played outside without hesitation. The family spent evenings together without the constant anxiety of inspection or confrontation. Ordinary routines became extraordinary moments of relief and joy. Every chore, every conversation, every shared meal carried a sense of victory and normalcy that had been nearly lost. The story of their struggle and victory also reached city officials and community leaders. Policies were reviewed, emergency call misuse was addressed, and HOA practices were scrutinized more carefully. The family had unknowingly sparked broader change, creating safeguards that would protect other residents from similar intimidation. Their fight became a lesson in civic responsibility and community. Advocacy. Friends and extended family often remarked on the transformation. They spoke of courage, patience, and the remarkable ability to maintain dignity under pressure. The family, once ordinary residents simply trying to live quietly, had become symbols of resilience. Their story showed that standing up for what is right does not require aggression. It's only determination, evidence, and patience. By the end of the year, the family could reflect with pride. They had endured false accusations, threats, and harassment, yet they emerged stronger, wiser, and more united. Their home was secure, their rights were recognized, and their community had changed for the better. The journey had been difficult, but it proved that justice is possible when one refuses to be intimidated. The children, now understanding the value of fairness and perseverance, carried lessons that extended beyond the legal victory. They learned the importance of truth, patience, and courage in the face of adversity. The parents knew that these experiences, though challenging, would shape the next generation to face life with integrity and resilience. As the family settled into a routine of peace and stability, they often reflected on the ordeal. Each letter, visit, and false call that once caused anxiety was now a reminder of how far they had come. The house, the yard, and even the streets around it were no longer symbols of tension but of triumph and freedom. The family's life, once disrupted, was now filled with calm, laughter, and the sense of justice served. In the quiet evenings, as the sun set over the property, the family would sit together on the porch sharing stories of the past year. They spoke honestly about fear, frustration, and the moments that tested them, but also celebrated resilience, unity, and the strength they discovered in themselves. Each sunset was a reminder that even in the darkest times, patience, preparation, and courage can lead to light. The final lesson they carried forward was simple but powerful. Standing up to intimidation is not just about winning a fight. It's about protecting your home, your family, and your dignity. The $4 million ruling was significant, but the real victory was the preservation of their lives, their peace, and their sense of justice. Their story became a testament to courage, resilience, and the power of ordinary people to challenge misuse of authority and prevail. Life after the court ruling carried a different rhythm for the family. Months had passed since the victory, but the memory of the struggle remained vivid in their minds. They had learned lessons about resilience, patience, and standing up to power, and these lessons began to shape their daily life in new and unexpected ways. The home that had once been a source of stress was now a sanctuary, filled with the sounds of laughter, conversation, and quiet moments of reflection. The family approached the days with a renewed sense of purpose. They organized their routines to prioritize well-being, making space for activities that had been neglected during the months of conflict. The children spent more time outdoors, exploring the yard and the small woods nearby, free from the fear that had once shadowed every step. The parents focused on hobbies and projects that brought joy rather than anxiety. Even ordinary chores became meaningful acts of reclaiming life and space. Community engagement became a new focus. The family began speaking at local gatherings, sharing their story and the lessons they had learned. They emphasized the importance of documentation, legal knowledge, and calm persistence in facing unfair authority. People listened, asked questions, and sometimes shared their own experiences. Slowly, the family became a source of guidance and encouragement for others who had faced or feared harassment. The HOA itself had changed. New board members, under scrutiny from the community and local authorities, were careful to operate transparently. Policies were rewritten, and oversight was increased. The family occasionally attended meetings, not out of confrontation, but to provide perspective and ensure the lessons from their struggle were remembered. Their presence was quiet yet powerful, a reminder that accountability was possible and that the community could learn from past mistakes. Financial stability, though not their primary goal, had also improved. The awarded damages allowed them to invest in long-term improvements to the property. They repaired aging structures, upgraded utilities, and enhanced the landscaping. These changes were both practical and symbolic, a way to celebrate the reclaiming of their home and their rights. The family's confidence grew as they realized they could live without fear, the security of their legal victory backing them. Emotionally, the family healed gradually. They still remembered the stress and fear, but they began to separate the past from the present. Counseling sessions and supportive conversations helped process lingering anxiety. They learned to recognize triggers and to respond with calm, understanding that the power to intimidate was no longer effective. These skills became part of everyday life, helping the children grow with resilience and the parents maintain balance. The family also became more involved in advocacy. They worked with local groups to educate residents about their rights, about how to document harassment, and about the importance of legal recourse when faced with misuse of authority. Workshops and informal meetings became regular activities. They discovered a sense of fulfillment in helping others. Turning their personal ordeal into a positive force for change, celebrations became more intentional. Birthdays, anniversaries, and small victories were marked with care, appreciating not only the moments themselves but the journey that had led to them. Family traditions were renewed, and new ones were created. Each celebration reinforced the sense of safety, freedom, and connection that had been hard-won. The home, once tense and watched, became a place where ordinary joy was fully allowed. Friendships deepened as well. Those who had offered quiet support during the conflict were now acknowledged more openly. Bonds that had been tested by fear and avoidance were strengthened through shared understanding and mutual respect. The family learned the value of community, of allies, and of shared vigilance against injustice. Their story inspired not only caution, but hope. Showing that ordinary people could make a difference as time went on, the family reflected on their growth. The months of harassment and intimidation had tested every aspect of their lives, but they had endured and emerged stronger. The experience taught them patience, the importance of standing firm in truth, and the power of careful preparation. It also taught them humility, empathy, and the significance of helping others navigate similar challenges. The children, growing up in this post-conflict environment, absorbed lessons that went beyond the home or community. They learned about fairness, justice, and courage, observing firsthand how perseverance and careful action could protect what mattered most. The parents watched with pride as the children adopted these values, understanding that the legacy of the struggle would extend far into the future. In quiet moments, the family would sit together, looking at the house, the yard, and the surroundings that had once felt threatening. They would recall the moments of fear, the letters, the visits, and the false calls, and marvel at how they had navigated them without losing their dignity or spirit. These reflections became stories they would tell, not to relive fear, but to honor resilience and the victory of justice. The broader community began to show. subtle but meaningful change. Conversations about accountability, fairness, and respect became more common. Residents were more vigilant, yet more supportive, knowing that they could rely on documentation, legal advice, and community solidarity to protect their rights. The family's story became a symbol, quietly influencing behavior, policy, culture in ways that would last beyond immediate headlines, even years later. The family could see the impact of their actions. The HOA operated differently. The children had grown up with a strong sense of integrity. The family's home remained a place of safety and comfort. Visitors often remarked on the warmth of the household, unaware of the struggles that had once made it a place of tension. The family knew the truth. The knowledge of what they had endured and overcome gave them a sense of quiet strength. The final lesson of this extended journey was simple but profound. Life could return to ordinary rhythms, laughter, and joy, even after extraordinary challenges. Standing up for one's rights, documenting the truth, and acting with patience and dignity could transform fear into freedom. The family understood that victory was not only measured in legal terms or financial restitution, but in restored peace, resilience, and the ability to live life fully, unafraid and empowered. As time moved forward, the family found that life after the legal victory continued to offer lessons in patience, growth, and community impact. Though the immediate threat from the HOA had been resolved, the ripple effects of what they endured created new challenges and opportunities. They had learned that standing up for oneself was not a single moment, but a continual practice of awareness, vigilance, and courage. The children, now older, became curious about the world beyond their immediate surroundings. They asked questions about fairness, justice, and the systems that had both threatened and protected their family. The parents used these questions as teaching moments, explaining not just the events that had taken place, but the principles behind them. They emphasized the importance of observing carefully, documenting truthfully, and acting wisely, highlighting that courage often meant making small, consistent choices rather than dramatic gestures. In the neighborhood, subtle shifts continued. New residents moved in, bringing fresh perspectives, and the story of the family's experience remained quietly influential. Conversations about community rules, authority, and fairness became more open. The family participated in town meetings, workshops, and casual discussions, offering insights drawn from experience. People listened, not just out of curiosity, but because they recognized the wisdom born from real-life struggle. Financially, the family remained prudent. The awarded damages were managed carefully, invested in practical improvements for the home and education for the children. They also contributed to local charities and programs aimed at promoting community awareness and legal literacy. These actions reinforced their belief that the victory was not solely personal, but could benefit others facing similar situations. Their lives had become a blend of recovery, growth, and active contribution. Emotionally, the family experienced a renewed sense of balance. They were no longer constantly on edge, but they remained mindful of vigilance, understanding that lessons learned during harassment could prevent future vulnerabilities. Counseling and reflection had helped transform anxiety into strength, fear into discernment, and frustration into measured action. Daily routines became intentional, emphasizing calm, connection, and joy. Even small activities, such as morning walks or cooking meals together, carried meaning, reminding them of resilience and peace regained. One afternoon, an unexpected visitor arrived at the door. It was a journalist who had covered part of the court case years ago. They expressed interest in writing a follow-up story about the long-term impact of the legal battle. The family agreed, realizing that sharing their ongoing journey could inspire others and keep the lessons alive. The interview was candid, discussing not just the court victory, but the emotional, social, and personal growth that followed. It became clear that the story was evolving beyond confrontation into one of lasting influence and inspiration. Neighbors, too, began to approach the family with questions about how to handle disputes, the proper channels for complaints, and strategies for maintaining peace and fairness in the community. The The family listened patiently, sharing advice without judgment. They emphasized the importance of staying calm, gathering evidence, and seeking guidance from experts when necessary. Over time, the family's home became a quiet hub for guidance and encouragement, a place where experience met empathy. Even with these positive developments, challenges remained. Occasionally, minor conflicts arose in the community, testing the family's patience and resolve. However, each incident was handled differently than before. Instead of fear, they responded with measured action, careful documentation, and informed communication. Their previous experiences had equipped them to navigate tension without being overwhelmed. Demonstrating the lasting value of lessons learned through adversity, the family also began focusing on long-term goals. They explored educational opportunities, hobbies, and community initiatives that had been delayed during the months of stress. The children engaged in school projects with confidence, while the parents participated in community programs and volunteer work. Each activity reinforced the notion that life could be fulfilling, productive, and positive even after trauma. The home became not just a safe place, but a vibrant environment for learning, creativity, and growth. As the seasons changed, the family reflected on their journey frequently. They recognized the extraordinary courage they had shown in ordinary ways, responding to letters, documenting every visit, calmly interacting with officials, and maintaining unity. These acts of perseverance, though subtle, had accumulated into meaningful outcomes. They often discussed these lessons with each other, ensuring that both children and adults internalized the importance of resilience, careful planning, and moral courage. Socially, their story began influencing broader networks. Friends shared anecdotes about the family's experience. Local groups referenced their approach to dealing with harassment. And other communities began adapting similar strategies for documentation, communication, and advocacy. The family had moved from being victims of intimidation to becoming guides, demonstrating how personal struggle could lead to wider societal benefit. Every so often, the family revisited moments of fear and stress with clarity and understanding. They recalled the false calls, sudden visits, and threatening letters not with panic but with insight, analyzing what they had learned and how they had grown. These reflections became lessons for themselves and tools to teach others about courage under pressure. They understood that their story was no longer only about a fight against an HOA. It was about human resilience, the power of preparation, and the ability to influence positive change even from difficult circumstances. The neighborhood itself continued to evolve. Policies became more transparent, residents more engaged, and trust slowly rebuilt. The family witnessed that change was possible not just through legal action, but through consistent demonstration of integrity, fairness, and patience. They realized that their journey had extended far beyond personal vindication. It had contributed to a more just and informed community as the family looked forward. They remained vigilant but optimistic. They continued documenting important interactions, engaging with neighbors, and reflecting on lessons learned. Their approach balanced caution with freedom, awareness with joy. They celebrated ordinary successes alongside major milestones, understanding that life's richness came from small victories as much as significant triumphs. The final understanding they carried was profound. Life after conflict was not about returning to the way things were, but about creating a stronger, wiser, and more empowered existence. The family's journey demonstrated that ordinary people could face extraordinary challenges and emerge not only intact, but influential. Their story had evolved from harassment and fear into one of education, resilience, and lasting impact, in quiet moments at home. As the sun dipped below the horizon and the yard filled with the soft hum of evening, the family reflected on their path. They had endured intimidation, maintained dignity, and fought patiently for justice. They had reclaimed their home, strengthened their family bonds, and influenced their community. Through it all, they had learned that courage was not a single act, but a series of thoughtful, persistent choices. Each day lived with awareness, care, and purpose became a testament to that courage. The family's life had shifted from surviving to thriving. Every ordinary task, from gardening to meal preparation, carried deeper meaning. Their home, once a site of tension and fear, had become a place of learning, laughter, and connection. Their children understood the value of fairness and resilience, and the parents continued to model integrity and patience. The story of what they had faced and overcome had become a guiding narrative, not just for themselves, but for others who might one day need courage, persistence, and careful planning to protect what they hold dear.